The sound that broke my life wasn't a scream or a crash, but the soft, wet thud of a ripe tomato hitting the freshly painted white siding of my childhood home. I watched from the kitchen window, my morning coffee turning to acid in my stomach as my mother, Cynthia, stormed across our manicured lawn. Her stride was a violent punctuation in the quiet suburban morning. She didn't look like my mother. The woman I knew was a study in control, her emotions curated like the hydrangeas by the porch. This woman was feral. She stopped at the property line, where the flawless emerald grass met the wild, colorful chaos of Eleanor's garden. "You keep your lies away from my family, you miserable old woman," she shrieked, her voice shredding the peace of Maple Creek Drive. Eleanor, who had taught me how to tie my shoes and mend a broken heart, didn't flinch. She just stood there in her vegetable patch, a trowel hanging from her limp hand, her eyes filled with a bottomless, ancient sorrow I had never seen in them before. It was a grief that seemed too large for a dispute over a rogue tomato plant. She looked past my mother's trembling fury, her daze finding me in the window, as if she'd known I'd be there. Her lips, chapped from the sun, formed two silent words that echoed in the silent kitchen. "I'm sorry." Then she turned and walked into her cottage, the screen door slapping shut behind her like a full stop at the end of a sentence I hadn't known I was living. My mother stood there, alone on the lawn, her rage deflating into a tremor that racked her entire body. In that crystallized moment, watching the red juice of the tomato slide down the pristine white paint, I understood. The pristine foundation of my life, the 40 years I'd known as my history, was riddled with termites. And Eleanor, the woman who had been my second mother, held the truth that was making it all collapse. To understand the earthquake, you have to understand the landscape it shattered. My name is Sarah Ellis. I grew up in a picture-perfect colonial on a street where the lawns were a uniform green and the secrets were fertilized deep underground. My parents, Robert and Cynthia Ellis, were the pillars of this delicate ecosystem. Dad was a respected cardiologist, quiet, disciplined, a man who showed love by providing a safe, predictable life. His affection was a steady, low-wattage bulb, reliable, but never warm. Mom was the curator of our family's image, PTA president, master gardener, hostess of flawless dinner parties where the wine was always perfectly paired and the conversation never strayed into uncomfortable territory. Our life was a beautifully arranged museum, and she was its relentless director. And then there was Eleanor Dawson. She lived next door, in a cozy, slightly unkempt cottage that smelled of baking bread, potting soil, and possibility. She was my parents' age, but where they were polished, she was soft-edged. A landscape architect who worked from her sun-drenched studio, a widow whose husband had died young in a car accident. She was the one I ran to when I skinned my knee, when I didn't make the cheer squad, when my first boyfriend broke up with me. My mother would say, "Chin up, Sarah. It's not the end of the world." Eleanor would sit with me on her porch swing, hand me a tissue and a slice of still-warm banana bread, and say, "Tell me about it. Let it all out." She listened without judgment, her silence a balm. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was woven into the very fabric of our family. She came to my school plays, knew my favorite meal was her chicken pot pie, and had a key to our house for emergencies. My relationship with my mother was functional. It was based on expectations and achievements. Are your grades good? Is your hair presentable? Are you dating someone suitable? With Eleanor, I could just be. I could be messy, uncertain, passionate. She was the emotional anchor my pristine, controlled home often lacked. There were oddities, of course, but you don't question the quirks of your own normal. My mother was always subtly competitive with Eleanor.
It's a wonder she can keep any clients the way she lets that garden run wild, she'd remark, pruning a rosebush into submission. A little too much whimsy, not enough structure. And there was the one strange, unbreakable rule, delivered with a sharpness that felt disproportionate. I was never, under any circumstances, to look in the antique steamer trunk in our attic. It was locked with a heavy brass padlock, and the key was kept on my father's keychain, a place of supreme importance. It's just old tax documents and painful memories from before you were born, Sarah, my mother had told me once, her tone leaving no room for argument. Some chapters are better left closed. I'd accepted it. I'd accepted everything. The narrative of my life was simple and oft repeated. I was the only child of Robert and Cynthia Ellis, a couple who had struggled with infertility for years before I, their miracle baby, finally arrived. We had almost given up hope, my mother would say at family gatherings, her hand resting on my father's arm. And then our Sarah came along. It was a story I'd heard 1,000 times, a foundational myth of my existence. I never once thought to question the scripture of my own life. Why would I? The paper it was written on seemed so strong. The tomato incident changed everything. The quiet hostility that followed was a living thing, a Cold War fought over property lines and the overhanging branches of Eleanor's cherry tree. My mother refused to speak Eleanor's name, referring to her only as that woman. My father became quieter, more withdrawn, spending longer hours at the hospital, his presence in the house growing fainter, like a radio signal fading out. A week after the confrontation, I found a small lavender-colored fabric bag on my front porch. It was filled with dried lavender from Eleanor's garden, and tucked inside, between the fragrant stalks, was a folded note. Her handwriting, loopy and familiar, sent a jolt through me. Sarah, the key to that old steamer trunk is a standard size. A locksmith on Elm Street can make a copy. What's inside belongs to you. I'm so sorry it has to be this way. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a hint. It was a direct, deliberate act of rebellion against my parents' most sacred rule. For 3 days, the note burned a hole in my kitchen drawer. I'd look at my mother, so assured in her version of reality, as she meticulously folded napkins for a dinner party. And then at my father, with his weary, kind eyes as he read the paper, and I'd feel a wave of nauseating guilt. But Eleanor's silent, "I'm sorry," from the garden haunted me. The curiosity became a physical ache, a splinter in my mind I couldn't leave alone. I drove to the locksmith on Elm Street, a dusty, anachronistic shop tucked between a dry cleaner and a vacant storefront. The man inside, with magnifying glasses perched on his forehead, made the copy without a word. It felt heavy and illicit in my palm, a tiny piece of metal that held the potential to detonate my world.
The next afternoon, when I knew both my parents would be at a country club fundraiser, I climbed the pull-down ladder into the attic. It was a time capsule, thick with dust and the smell of forgotten things. And there it was, the old steamer trunk, squat and forbidding in the corner, just as forbidden as it had always been. My hand shook so violently I could barely fit the new key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click that echoed in the silent space. The lock sprang open. There were no tax documents on top. Instead, there was a layer of my own baby clothes, neatly folded, smelling faintly of cedar. A tiny hand-knitted yellow sweater I recognized from photos of my first birthday. A pair of soft leather booties. Beneath that, a stack of letters tied with a faded velvet ribbon. And beneath those, a large, stiff manila envelope. I opened the letters first. They were from my father, Robert, to Eleanor. The date started over 40 years ago. "My dearest Ellie," the first one began,
Another fight with Cynthia. It's like living with a ghost. She's so cold, so concerned with what the neighbors will think. She says she can't live in your shadow. She doesn't understand that you are the sun, and I am just a planet in your orbit. This marriage is a cage I built with my own two hands. I read on, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. The letters detailed a passionate, years-long affair. They spoke of stolen afternoons in her cottage, of deep intellectual connection, of a love that was as vital to him as air. They were filled with a desperate wish for a different life, a life with her. The final letter, dated just a few months before my birth, was a heartbreaking farewell. My Ellie, Cynthia is pregnant. It's a miracle after all these years of trying. I can't leave her now. It would destroy her. We have to end this. For the sake of the child. I will always love you. Always. In. R. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the trunk to steady myself. My father, the stoic cardiologist, had written these achingly vulnerable words. I fumbled for the manila envelope. My fingers were numb. Inside was a single, grainy black and white ultrasound image. The name on the top corner wasn't my mother's. It was Eleanor V. Dawson. And tucked carefully beside it was my own, official-looking birth certificate. In the space for mother, it read, Cynthia Marie Ellis. But when I held it up to the dim light of the single attic bulb, I saw it. The ghost of another name beneath it, a faint typewritten impression left on the paper from the original document that had been filled out before this one. The name was Eleanor Violet Dawson.
The pieces crashed together with the force of a physical blow. The miracle baby wasn't a miracle of Cynthia's body. I wasn't Cynthia's daughter. I was Eleanor's. My father had had an affair with the woman next door, gotten her pregnant, and then given me to his wife to raise as their own. Eleanor, my real mother, had spent 40 years living 20 feet away, watching another woman raise her child, bound by a promise or a threat I couldn't even comprehend. She had watched me call another woman mom. The cruelty of it was astronomical. It wasn't just a lie, it was an annihilation. My entire identity, the bedrock of who I was, Sarah Ellis, beloved only child, dissolved into dust. I wasn't a person. I was a secret, a living, breathing lie, and the two people I trusted most had been its authors. I didn't confront them that night. I went through the motions of their return from the fundraiser, my body on autopilot. I listened to my mother, Cynthia, as she prattled on about who was there and what they wore, her face a perfect, placid mask of motherhood. I looked at my father as he quietly poured himself a scotch, the man who had written those passionate letters and then chosen a life of quiet, cowardly desperation. The betrayal was so vast, so fundamental, it was beyond anger. It was a void, a howling emptiness where my history used to be. 2 nights later, I broke. They were in the living room, watching the evening news, a scene of such mundane domesticity, it felt like a sick parody. I walked in, holding the ultrasound and the birth certificate. I didn't say a word. I just placed them on the glass coffee table between them, the sound of the paper hitting the glass unnaturally loud. The silence that fell was heavier than any sound. The news anchor's voice chattered on, a meaningless buzz. Cynthia's face went from confused irritation to dawning horror, her skin leaching of all color. My father simply crumpled. He didn't move, but it was as if his skeleton had been removed. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed, as if the weight of 40 years had finally, physically, broken him.
Sarah, he began, his voice a ragged, broken thing. Is it true? I asked, my own voice terrifyingly calm, a flat lake over a drowned city. Is Eleanor my mother? Cynthia shot to her feet, the movement jerky. How dare you? After everything we've given you, that woman has poisoned you with her lies. She's always been jealous, jealous of our family, of our life. These aren't lies, I said, my finger tapping the birth certificate. This is a legal document, a forged one. You can see the ghosting. And these, I said, pulling the bundle of letters from my back pocket, are your words, Dad. You loved her. You got her pregnant. And then you stole her child and gave me to your wife like a consolation prize. We didn't steal you, Cynthia cried, her composure shattering into 1,000 brittle pieces. We saved you. She was unstable. A single mother with no real prospects? What kind of life could she have given you? We gave you a stable home, a name, a future, everything. You gave me a lie, I finally shouted, the calm shattering, the rage and hurt I'd been suppressing roaring to the surface. You let me call you Mom, while my real mother lived next door, watching me call another woman by her name. What did you do? Pay her off? Threaten her? Tell her she'd never see me again if she didn't play along? My father looked up, his eyes swimming with tears of pure shame. It was her idea, Sarah. In a way, we all thought, it would be cleaner for you. A simple story. No scandal, no whispers. Cynthia could have the child she'd always wanted, and Eleanor could still be in your life. Cleaner for who? I demanded, my voice cracking. Easier for who? For you? So the great Dr. Ellis wouldn't have to admit to his colleagues and his country club friends that he'd gotten the bohemian neighbor pregnant? So you, Cynthia, could finally have the baby you couldn't produce yourself and prove to the world your family was perfect? The ugliness of it hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. They had no answer. The architects of my life stood exposed, not as my protectors, but as the cowardly curators of a beautiful, soul-crushing prison. Get out, I said, my voice dropping back to a deadened whisper. This is my house, Cynthia sputtered, a last desperate grasp for control. No, I said, looking from her perfectly made-up face to my father's broken one. It's the set for your play, and the performance is over. The audience has left. Get out. They left, stunned and silent. My father didn't meet my eyes as he guided a weeping Cynthia out the door. I stood alone in the silent, perfect house, surrounded by the expensive furniture and curated art, the artifacts of a life that had never truly been mine. And I knew, with a cold, clear certainty that settled in my bones, that my real work, the work of building a life that was truly mine, was just beginning. My revenge would not be about hatred or violence. It would be about reclamation. It would be a systematic, legal, and emotional process of taking back what was mine, my name, my history, and my mother. My first call the next morning was to a family law attorney named Maria Flores, who specialized in contested adoptions and parental rights. I sat in her modern, minimalist office and laid it all out. The forged birth certificate, the letters, the ultrasound, the whole sordid story. She listened, her expression neutral and professional. What are your goals, Sarah? She finally asked. I want my name back, I said, the words feeling powerful as I spoke them. I want my birth certificate to tell the truth. I don't want to disown Robert Ellis, but I want Eleanor Dawson formally and legally recognized as my mother. We initiated a petition to amend my birth certificate due to fraud and factual error. It was a slow, bureaucratic process, but it was the foundation of everything. Simultaneously, Maria drafted a formal letter to Robert and Cynthia, stating that until I decided the nature and extent of any future relationship, all communication was to go through her. I was building a fortress of legal precedent around my new truth. With the legal wheels in motion, I went to Eleanor's house. I didn't knock, I just walked in, as I always had, the familiar scent of her home now loaded with new meaning. She was sitting at her worn kitchen table, a cup of tea going cold in front of her, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for 40 years. I laid the ultrasound picture on the table between us. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice soft but firm. "No more secrets. Start from the beginning." And she did. Through tears that seemed to have been held back for a lifetime, she told me about the deep, unexpected love she and Robert shared, a connection her late husband had never provided. She described the sheer terror and joy of discovering the pregnancy. The pressure from both families had been immense. Robert's medical career, Cynthia's social standing. Cynthia was desperate, she whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped her teacup. She said she would collapse, that she would be a laughingstock. But she also said, she could give you the life I never could, the security, the opportunities. She said if you truly loved me, I would let you go. Robert agreed. He was weak, terrified of the scandal. They made me sign papers, a private adoption. They promised I could be in your life as a neighbor, a friend. It was a torture and a blessing, Sarah, watching you grow up so close yet so far away, hearing you call her Mom. It was a fresh cut every single time. I finally understood the source of her bottomless sorrow. She hadn't abandoned me. She had been coerced into a sacrifice of unimaginable proportions to keep even a sliver of me in her life. I decided there would be no more secrets, no more protecting their reputation. I would not be their dirty little secret anymore. I planned a party, not a birthday, not a holiday, a rebirthday. I rented a small, cheerful room at a local Italian restaurant and sent out invitations to our extended family, my parents' closest friends, and a few of my own. The invitation was simple and direct. You are cordially invited to a celebration of truth and family. Please join Sarah Dawson and her mother, Eleanor Dawson, as they honor the past and welcome the future, an informal gathering of love and new beginnings.
The reaction was instantaneous. My phone buzzed for days. The gasps in the room when Eleanor and I walked in together, arm in arm, were audible. The whispers were a roaring river. My Aunt Carol, Cynthia's sister, pulled me aside almost immediately. "Sarah Dawson? What in God's name is this? Your mother is devastated. She won't leave her room." I looked over at Eleanor, who was smiling nervously, holding a plate of bruschetta, and then back at my aunt. "Cynthia is my father's wife. She raised me, and for that, I will always be complex. But this," I said, my voice clear and carrying, "is my mother." We didn't explain. We didn't justify. We didn't present evidence. We simply were. We let the truth, in its raw, unvarnished form, ripple out through the community, dismantling my parents' perfect facade piece by piece. Let them try to explain it. Let them live in the wreckage of their own narrative. The final, most personal act of reclamation was my move. I could no longer live in the town where the Ellis family myth was so entrenched. I put in for a transfer at work and bought a small, charming fixer-upper a few towns over with a big backyard for a garden. Eleanor helped me pick it out. "Good bones," she'd said, her professional eye assessing it, "and the light in this room is perfect for painting." We spent weekends painting the rooms together, getting more paint on ourselves on the drop cloths than on the walls, listening to old music and laughing, a deep, real, unburdened laughter I never remembered sharing in my childhood home. I changed my name legally everywhere. My email, my social media, my professional profiles. I was now Sarah Dawson. It felt foreign on my tongue for the first few weeks, then empowering. It was my name, my truth. I started seeing a therapist to untangle the complex knot of grief, anger, and love I felt for all three of my parents. I didn't cut Robert out completely. We meet for coffee sometimes in a neutral cafe. It's strained, filled with his profound regret and my quiet, distant pity. He lives in the wreckage of his own choices, a ghost of the man he might have been. Cynthia sends long, self-pitying emails full of accusations and rewritten history that I have learned to delete without reading. Their perfect world has collapsed, not because I destroyed it with malice, but because I simply stopped helping them prop it up. The fallout was swift and absolute. The scandal was the talk of their social circle for a season, a delicious piece of gossip that forever stripped them of their moral authority. My parents, Robert and Cynthia, are still together, bound now not by love or even shared history, but by their shared shame and isolation. They live in the same beautiful house on Maple Creek Drive, but it's just a house now, a museum to a narrative that everyone knows is false. The greatest punishment for them is the quiet, ordinary, and deeply lonely life they now lead, stripped of the admiration and respect they so desperately craved. As for me, I'm Sarah Dawson. The name fits me now, like a well-worn sweater. I finally understand the source of the quiet, persistent disconnect I always felt in that pristine colonial, the feeling of being a guest in my own home. I wasn't broken. I was just a square peg trying to fit into a very round, very carefully constructed hole.